Welcome to History Crossroads, where past meets present, and every story reveals a new path through time.
Washington, D.C., 1941. You're sitting in one of those government rooms that feels designed to make you uncomfortable. Bare walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, air conditioning set just cold enough to remind you that someone else is in charge here. And across the table from a group of stone-faced American officials sits, well, honestly, he looks completely out of place. Duško Popov, tailored suit that probably costs more than most of these guys make in a month. Perfectly composed, not nervous at all, which, if you think about it, is kind of weird for someone supposedly bringing urgent intelligence. He's not fidgeting, not leaning forward trying to sell them on how important he is. He's just waiting, like he's got all the time in the world, which immediately makes everyone in the room suspicious. Now, the officials, they're doing that thing bureaucrats do. Hands folded, pens resting on notepads like weapons they're choosing not to use yet. They're trained to distrust anything that comes too easily, especially when it arrives looking this confident. Popov slides a folder across the table. No drama, no movie moment, just paper meeting wood. These are German intelligence questions, he says. The officials glance down. Most of it's pretty standard stuff. Logistics, defenses, what you'd expect. The boring vocabulary of war preparation. But then, there's something else. Questions that keep circling back to one specific place. A harbor. In the Pacific. Pearl Harbor. Popov watches their faces, not nervously, but professionally. And you can see it. That tiny jaw clench. That quick glance between colleagues. That pause that lasts just a fraction too long. This, Popov says quietly, is what they want to know. He lets that sit there for a moment. And this is how wars begin. Now here's where it gets interesting. The officials look back at him, and you can almost see the shift happening in real time. They're not thinking about what he's telling them. They're thinking about him, the accent, the expensive suit, that unsettling confidence. He doesn't look like someone who delivers warnings. He looks like someone who enjoys expensive wine and takes risks at casinos. In other words, he looks like someone they absolutely do not trust. The document stays on the table. They acknowledge it, politely, professionally, the way you'd acknowledge someone telling you about their weird dream. A note gets made. A folder gets closed, and the warning gets absorbed into a system specifically designed to smooth out sharp edges and delay uncomfortable truths. Popov sees it happening. He recognizes it immediately. He's done the hard part. He's delivered the truth, and the truth has just been dismissed because of the suit it arrived in. December 7th, 1941. Sunday morning. Beautiful day over Oahu. Sailors going through routines they think will last forever. Coffee brewing. Radios humming softly in the background. Just another peaceful Sunday. And then, noise, fire, steel, chaos. History stops being something you read about and becomes something irreversible. And somewhere far from the smoke and the screaming, Duško Popov already knows what it means to be ignored. Not because he's a hero, just because he was right. Okay. So, if Duško Popov seems like an unlikely person to warn America about Pearl Harbor, he's an even more unlikely person to become a spy in the first place. I mean, this is a guy whose natural habitat is casinos and five-star hotel bars, not dead drops and coded messages. He was born into serious wealth, and I mean the real kind, not we're doing well wealth, the kind that moves quietly and doesn't need to announce itself. He spent his youth bouncing between European cities, educated abroad, picking up languages and social skills the way most people pick up bad habits. Here's the thing about Popov. From an early age, he figured out that borders were more like suggestions than rules. That authority usually depended less on actual power and more on performance. He grew up multilingual, went to Europe's best schools, surrounded by people who expected doors to open for them, and usually watched exactly that happen. This wasn't arrogance, It was just familiarity. The world to Popov was something you navigated, not something you feared. But intelligence alone? That's not what made him valuable. Plenty of smart guys entered the war and promptly disappeared into it. What set Popov apart was something harder to define: ease. He was at ease with money, at ease with risk, at ease with people who wanted something from him. Watch him at a casino table, he'd drink without losing control, gamble without panic, charm people without even trying. To everyone watching, he looked careless, indulgent, maybe even a little reckless. But underneath, Popov was always paying attention. He understood how people wanted to be seen, and more importantly, how desperately they wanted to be believed. And that made him incredibly valuable. Because here's the thing about intelligence agencies on the brink of war. They weren't looking for Boy Scouts. They were looking for types. People who could move through hotels, cafes, and nightclubs without drawing suspicion. People whose presence felt natural in rooms filled with power, money, and moral compromise. A disciplined idealist? That guy raises questions. His posture's too stiff. His convictions are too visible. But a polished playboy laughing over drinks and tossing money across a poker table? Nobody suspects that guy of anything except having a good time. Popov fit perfectly. To German intelligence, he looked completely corruptible. A man with appetites could be bought. A man who loved pleasure could be controlled. His wealth, his confidence, his apparent self-indulgence, these weren't liabilities. They were leverage. So, when the Germans approached him, they thought they understood exactly who he was. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. Popov accepted their interest calmly, didn't protest, didn't hesitate, didn't disappear. Instead, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He'd play their game, just not for them. Instead of refusing the Germans or vanishing under suspicion, Popov walked straight into British intelligence and offered them something rare and dangerous: himself. It was a calculation made quickly without ceremony, and it came with the quiet understanding that if this went wrong, there wouldn't be second chances. Not a confession, not a patriotic speech, a proposal. If the Germans want a spy, I'll become one, and then we'll decide what that spy tells them. The British were skeptical. Of course they were. Popov was too smooth, too comfortable, too willing. He didn't look like a man driven by duty. He looked like someone who enjoyed danger a little too much. But British intelligence understood something fundamental about espionage. The most useful people are rarely the most admirable. Popov could go places their officers couldn't. He could live loudly, spend freely, lie convincingly to people who expected him to lie. So instead of trying to change him, they did something far more dangerous. They let him be himself. They wouldn't rein him in, wouldn't sanitize him. They'd weaponize him. Because in a war built on deception, a man who looked like a liability could actually be your most convincing asset. And soon, Duško Popov would be given a role that required him to live exactly as he appeared: reckless, indulgent, and entirely believable. A role that came with a code name that sounded almost like a joke, but would carry very real consequences. So here's the thing about Popov's usefulness. It didn't come from being invisible. It came from being seen. When British intelligence agreed to work with him, they made a decision that would define everything that followed. They weren't going to turn him into some quiet courier slipping through back alleys. They weren't going to make him disappear into coded messages and secret meetings. They were going to let him be seen. More than that, they'd let him be remembered. The Germans already believed Popov was exactly what he appeared to be: a wealthy, indulgent opportunist with loose morals and expensive tastes. British intelligence saw no reason to challenge that belief. Instead, they'd weaponize it. Popov was assigned a code name that sounds almost ridiculous: Tricycle. But the name actually makes perfect sense. Not because it's playful, but because it captures the danger. Popov would be balancing between three forces at once: German intelligence, British handlers, and the murky world of neutral Europe, where spies, diplomats, smugglers, and criminals all shared the same bars. To survive, he'd have to balance constantly, and he'd have to do it loudly. Lisbon became his stage. Portugal was officially neutral, which made it the perfect clearinghouse for intelligence. Think about it. Cigarette smoke hanging thick in hotel lounges, glasses clinking late into the night, secrets traded over drinks. Rumors moved faster than trains, and everyone pretended not to notice the men watching from the corners of the room. Popov moved through the city like he owned it, because honestly, he kind of did. He stayed in the best hotels, drank in the most visible bars, surrounded himself with people who talked too much and listened too little. And when he gambled, he did it where everyone could see. At the Casino Estoril, Popov would place bets that made people stop and stare. Not desperate betting, confident betting. The kind that suggested either he knew something they didn't, or he genuinely didn't care what happened next. British intelligence quietly backed him financially, underwriting the whole performance and accepting the risk that one bad night, one overheard comment, could blow everything. The money was never the point. The audience was. German agents noticed immediately. Of course they did. A man who risks that much in public doesn't look careful. He looks predictable, corruptible, useful, exactly what they wanted to see. Now here's what's fascinating. Popov understood the danger completely. Living this loudly invited constant scrutiny. One wrong word, one missed signal, one badly judged moment, and the whole illusion collapses. But Popov wasn't improvising. He was performing. Every drink, every flirtation, every roll of the dice was part of the act. He let people believe he was distracted by pleasure. He let them underestimate him. That was the real deception. And slowly, German intelligence began to trust him. Not all at once. Trust in espionage never works that way. It's tested, chipped away at, reinforced through small confirmations. A piece of information here that checks out. A suggestion there that proves accurate. Enough truth to make the lies believable. Popov delivered exactly what was expected. And because he looked like a man who'd betray anyone for the right price, nobody suspected he'd chosen his loyalty long ago. In this world, credibility didn't come from restraint, it came from excess. Popov became a familiar figure in Lisbon, a name whispered first with amusement, then with interest, a man whose reputation actually worked for him. The Germans saw what they wanted to see. British intelligence watched carefully, fully aware they were handling a weapon that could easily turn in their hands. And Popov kept moving forward, completely aware that the persona protecting him was also the thing that would eventually make his warnings unbelievable. Because when you convince everyone you're careless, there's one thing nobody will ever believe you can be, right. And that assumption, about who Popov was and what he could possibly know, was about to be tested in a way that would cost thousands of lives. The questionnaire arrived without any drama, no urgent courier, no warning from Berlin. Just another envelope, paper slightly creased from handling, delivered the same unremarkable way as 100 others before it. Popov opened it expecting more routine intelligence requests. Instead, he found something that made him go very, very still. The questionnaire was detailed, meticulous in a way that immediately set it apart from the usual stuff. This wasn't idle curiosity or routine intelligence gathering. These questions dug deep, probing defenses, readiness, response times with a precision that felt surgical, and they kept returning to one place, Pearl Harbor. Popov understood the danger instantly. This wasn't hypothetical. This wasn't, what if we wanted to know about? This was a rehearsal. German intelligence wasn't asking what could be done. They were asking what would happen. Now, other men might have panicked here, might have rushed out, interrupted people, demanded urgent meetings. Popov did something quieter, and far more important. He paid attention. He recognized this document for what it was, a signal, a rare glimpse of intent slipping through the cracks of secrecy. And he understood, with absolute clarity, that if this information didn't reach the right people, or reach them, and they drew the wrong conclusions, the consequences would be catastrophic. So Popov did exactly what he was supposed to do. He took the questionnaire to the Americans. The meeting felt painfully familiar. Same flat lighting, same controlled quiet, same institutional confidence that history could be managed if you just followed the correct procedures. Popov laid the document on the table and explained calmly, clearly, where it came from, why it mattered, what it suggested. He didn't exaggerate, didn't dramatize. Just let the paper speak for itself. The response was measured, careful, and deeply skeptical. You could feel the evaluation shifting, away from the document and toward him. The accent, the reputation, the lifestyle that followed him like cologne. This wasn't how American intelligence expected a warning to look. J. Edgar Hoover distrusted Popov almost immediately. Files were consulted, judgments formed. And Hoover? He didn't like how Popov carried himself, didn't like the rumors, and he especially didn't like the idea that a man who lived this freely could be trusted with something this grave. Hoover saw Popov as unreliable, worse, immoral. The document was acknowledged, notes were taken, but that sense of urgency Popov felt, it didn't transfer. The warning was set aside, not dismissed outright. That would look bad in hindsight. Just absorbed into a system specifically designed to slow uncomfortable information until it loses its sharp edges. Popov recognized the moment it happened. He'd delivered the truth. And the truth had been judged, not on its content, but on the man carrying it. December 7th, 1941. Sunday morning. Calm, bright sky over Oahu. Sailors moving through routines that felt permanent. Radios playing softly. The day carrying absolutely no hint of alarm. Then the sound arrived. Aircraft, explosions, fire, steel tearing through steel. The attack unfolded with brutal efficiency. In the days that followed, explanations would be written. Investigations launched. Failures debated in Congress and conference rooms. But for Popov, the moment was simple and devastating. He knew exactly when it had begun, not with the bombs, but with a document that had arrived quietly and been ignored. And in that realization lay the cruelest truth of all. Being right isn't enough. Not if the right people don't want to believe you. After Pearl Harbor, Duško Popov returned to Europe carrying a truth nobody had wanted, and a lesson he'd never forget. Being right doesn't guarantee being believed. If Popov was going to matter in this war, it wouldn't be because he spoke the truth at the right moment. It would be because he learned to lie in exactly the right way. And here's the ironic part. British intelligence hadn't ignored him. While American officials dismissed Popov as unreliable and morally suspect, British planners watched him closely and understood what he represented. A channel the Germans trusted. A voice they listened to. A man whose excess and visibility had actually purchased him credibility on the other side. That credibility was about to become priceless. By 1943 and 1944, the Allies were preparing for the largest invasion in modern history. And success wasn't just about soldiers and ships. It was about convincing Germany to look in the wrong direction, long enough for the real blow to land. The operation was called Fortitude, and it was deception on an absolutely massive scale. Entire armies were invented. False radio traffic flooded the airwaves. Inflatable tanks sat in open fields looking real from the air. Paper divisions maneuvered across maps while actual soldiers waited elsewhere. But none of it mattered unless the Germans believed the story. And that required messengers they already trusted. Men like Popov. Popov resumed his role with new purpose. He fed German intelligence a steady diet of carefully calibrated misinformation, reinforcing the idea that the Allied invasion would land not in Normandy, but at Calais. It was a lie layered on top of existing expectations. The shortest crossing, the most obvious target, the invasion that made sense. And because it made sense, the Germans believed it. Popov didn't exaggerate, didn't invent grand falsehoods. He just nudged assumptions in the wrong direction and let German analysts do the rest. This was deception at its most effective. Not contradiction, confirmation. German high command held divisions back, waiting for an invasion that never came. When Allied forces finally stormed the beaches of Normandy in June 1944, many of Germany's strongest units were still positioned miles away, watching empty coastline. The deception had worked. Popov never set foot on the beaches of Normandy, never fired a weapon during the invasion. But his lies shaped the battlefield before the first soldier landed, buying precious time, misdirecting entire armies, reducing the resistance Allied forces faced in those critical opening hours. In a war remembered for heroism and sacrifice, Popov's contribution was invisible by design. There are no medals for convincing an enemy to wait in the wrong place, no parades for men who win battles without firing a shot. But lives were saved, the war was shortened, and Popov had finally done what he couldn't do in Washington. He'd been believed, not by allies, by enemies. Victory didn't bring clarity for Duško Popov. Maybe he expected some kind of closure, vindication, recognition. Instead, victory brought silence. When the war ended, the world rushed to celebrate heroes it could easily understand. Soldiers in uniform marching through parades, generals with prepared speeches, headlines that reduced years of chaos into clean victories with clean faces attached. Popov didn't fit that story. He returned to a world eager to simplify the war into tales of courage and sacrifice, stories that left little room for men who'd survived by lying, cheating, and manipulating belief. British intelligence thanked him quietly. Handshakes, private acknowledgments, a shared understanding that he'd done his part. But no public recognition. For the Americans, the silence was even colder. J. Edgar Hoover never revised his opinion. To admit Popov had been right would mean admitting institutional failure, something Hoover had absolutely no intention of doing. Files were sealed, memos closed, doors quietly shut. Popov's role in warning about Pearl Harbor was buried without ceremony. The result wasn't punishment, it was erasure. Popov was neither tried nor celebrated. He was simply forgotten, and history moved on. In the years after the war, a new kind of spy captured the public imagination, one shaped by novels, films, and a post-war hunger for heroes who felt reassuring rather than unsettling. He was disciplined, controlled, moral in the way fiction often demands, a man whose excesses never interfered with his loyalty. James Bond. The irony is almost painful. Bond was inspired in part by men like Popov, by the casinos, the charm, the visibility, the dangerous ease with which real spies moved through the world. But Bond was safe. Popov was not. Bond always obeyed the mission. Popov questioned institutions. Bond won clean victories. Popov exposed uncomfortable truths. So one became a legend, and the other became inconvenient. Popov lived the rest of his life largely outside the spotlight. He wrote, he reflected. He watched the world enjoy the fantasy of espionage while forgetting the cost of the real thing. He'd played his role well, maybe too well, because the same qualities that made him indispensable during the war made him impossible to celebrate afterward. History prefers heroes who confirm its beliefs. Popov didn't. Duško Popov's story doesn't end with victory or recognition. It ends the way many uncomfortable stories do, with doubt, dismissal, and a question that lingers longer than any celebration. What happens when the truth arrives in the wrong package? Popov didn't fail because his information was wrong. He failed because of how he looked, how he lived, how comfortable he was in rooms that demanded seriousness as proof of credibility. He delivered truth wearing confidence, excess, and charm, and institutions built on control mistook those traits for unreliability. This isn't just a story about espionage. It's a story about judgment, about how systems decide who's worth listening to and who isn't. Think about it. Popov warned America about Pearl Harbor and was ignored. Then he lied to Germany about D-Day and was believed. Belief that delayed divisions, saved lives, and helped shape the outcome of the war. The difference wasn't the truth, it was trust. History often tells us that information changes the world, but Popov's life suggests something more uncomfortable. Belief does. The past is filled with moments where warnings were delivered by the wrong people, in the wrong voices, at the wrong time. And those moments rarely announce themselves as failures. They feel like procedure, caution, reason, until they don't. Popov lived long enough to watch the world celebrate the fantasy of espionage, while quietly forgetting the cost of the real thing. He understood something history still struggles to admit. Truth doesn't move history on its own. People do. And when institutions decide who they trust, they're not just choosing messengers, they're choosing futures. Thanks for joining me on History Crossroads. If this story made you think, surprised you, or is still rattling around in your head right now, follow the show and share it with someone who appreciates history's quieter turning points. Because sometimes the most important voices are the ones nobody wants to hear. Until next time.